I got the job at the gas station by luck, or maybe unluck, depending on how you view late-night shifts and creepy crawlies that aren't just the insects hitting the fluorescent lights. See, I've always been a night owl, and the solitude of the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift didn't bother me much. The station sits by itself along Route 29, a good 20 miles either way to the next faint glimmer of civilization. It's got its charms if you're the kind who finds silence comforting rather than maddening. My manager, Keith, was a gaunt fellow with gray creeping into his buzz cut and a way of squinting at you like you were a particularly hard-to-read user manual. After a cursory nod to the certifications tacked carelessly behind the register, he handed me a crumpled sheet called Regulations, telling me, "Stick to these and you'll be just fine." To me, his tone carried a weight that was unsettling, like each syllable was a warning. Rule number 1 seemed normal enough. Always double-check ID for alcohol sales after midnight. Fair, legal stuff makes sense. But rule number 2, never let anyone in wearing a red cap. I had to ask about that one. Keith looked around as if the candy bars might overhear us and whispered, not quite joking, "They're not buying what you're selling." I laughed a nervous laugh, the kind that's half curiosity, half dread. The first few hours of my inaugural shift passed in the kind of soft, droning hum that you could almost meditate to: scanner beeps, the rustle of packaged snacks, and the occasional whoosh of a passing truck. That hour deep in the night, just before 3 a.m., the whole world seemed to hold its breath, until it was shattered by the nudging chime of the door. A straggle of 3 customers entered, the wan light catching on their tired faces as they meandered towards the snacks. I gave them a nod and went back to scrolling through my phone, only vaguely aware of the sounds of their murmured conversation interspersed with the occasional plastic wrap crinkling. Minutes turned to what I figured was going on 30 or so when I realized they were still there, drifting around aisle 3. That was when the artificial scent of pine air freshener suddenly soured, turning sharp and acrid, like something burning but not quite catching fire. It tugged at the edges of my anxiety, was one of those fridges failing again. Nudging my curiosity, I rounded the counter, pausing as I reached the aisle. They were standing stock still, facing the shelves, not talking, not really browsing, just standing, my mouth open to ask if they needed help with anything. But as my footfall sounded a bit too loudly on the linoleum, all 3 heads snapped towards me, no prior motion, just a too fast jerk of necks. Their eyes were wide, bland, as if caught mid-thought. The one closest to me, a woman in a tattered bomber jacket, tilted her head slightly, mirroring my earlier curiosity. "Just looking," she said, her voice a monotone that didn't match the polite smile she pushed onto her face. "All right, let me know if you need anything," I replied, trying to sound cheerful, but feeling the distinct drop in room temperature, or perhaps just my blood cooling in my veins. As I stepped away, the scent of burning grew stronger, my eyes watering as I puzzled over where it could be coming from. Making my way back to the register, the back of my neck prickled like someone was hovering just out of sight, watching. The CCTV showed nothing amiss. A few blind spots lingered where the darkness outside pressed greedily against the windows. As the shift wore on, the trio left, as silently as they had been standing, and I was left with the echo of my own heart thudding unevenly. Shaking off the unease, I started closing routines, brushing off the oddness as sleep-deprived paranoia. Then, as I was signing off the register log, I glimpsed the corner of something red under the counter, a cap, dusty and forgotten. The sense of wrongness attached to it was palpable, and my mind flashed back to Keith's regulation. My palms felt clammy as I reached for it, the fabric unnaturally cold, and a wave of nausea hit me hard. I dropped it like it burned me, and right then, somewhere close, too damn close, a dog started barking, desperate and sharp, unsettling the dead air around me. I froze, the sound scratching the edge of my thoughts. We didn't have stray dogs around here. Not usually. Keith's words suddenly didn't feel so obscure anymore. And that was just my first night. After completing the shaky handwritten letter to Grandma June, who always insisted on the charm of snail mail over the coldness of texts, I couldn't shake the unease that Keith's words laced through my nerves like cold fingers. His warning, blurred by whiskey but sharply sincere, "Never trust quiet shadows nor still waters here," replayed a relentless loop in my mind as I lay in bed, the darkness of my new, small-town room swallowing me whole. Odd noises, a whispered L. Ulling similar to leaves brushing against each other, though the closest tree was several feet away from my window, kept me awake. I told myself it was just the house settling, or perhaps my mind unwinding the tightly held coils of city tension. But the explanation was thin, translucent. I could almost see the truth squirming beneath it. I decided a walk might clear my head. The clock blinked 2:03 a.m. in a lazy, fluorescent green. The streets of Leabrook would be silent, surely. The air was chilly, leaving a misty breath hanging in front of me as I stepped onto the wooden porch. The streetlights cast pools of orange light that seemed more swallowing than illuminating, each surrounded by an obscuring moat of darkness. In that moment, Keith's still waters morphed from metaphor to an eerie, palpable gloom. Forced to trust my own weak beam of flashlight, I ventured further, past the row of ancient maples lining the sidewalk, their branches gnarled like the arthritic fingers of a crone. Leabrook slept hard. The house is dark, the only sounds the distant howl of a dog or the nearer rustle of my steps on the dry leaves. I crossed the bridge over Mason's Creek, the water black and mirror-still beneath, and recalled how the town history mentioned its use as a makeshift grave during the 1918 influenza outbreak. A sudden splash shattered the glassy calm of the water. My heartbeat thrashed against my ears. Frantic, I flashed the light towards the source, half expecting to see a drenched corpse risen from its flu-ridden slumber. But no, there was only the ripple of water and something else, a feeling I was not alone. Glancing back at the sheltering darkness of the maples, I felt watched. Not with eyes, but by the town itself, as if every shadow whispered and pointed at the outsider daring to wander its secrets after dark. "Ridiculous," I muttered, chiding myself. Yet the unease pressed closer, like the fog that started to roll off the creek, white fingers stretching toward the bank. I turned toward home, my pace quickening. But it wasn't until I was climbing back onto my porch that I noticed the window to my room wide open, curtains fluttering like ghostly flags. I could have sworn I'd locked it. Old habits die hard. Inside, the gloom clung stubbornly against the weak push of my flashlight's beam. As I reached for the window to close it, a cold draft greeted me. My bedroom had two exits, the door to the hallway and this window. Neither had I used to leave the house. I had exited through the back. Heart thudding with a mix of fear and denial, I scanned the room. Everything seemed untouched. My few unpacked boxes huddled in the corner, the stale air disturbed only by my sudden movements. Still, my skin crawled with the unmistakable sensation of recent presence, unsettling as a stranger's sigh against my neck. I couldn't swallow it down this time, could not convince myself of logic when my gut screamed otherwise. Maybe Keith wasn't a crumpled old fool shadowed by drunken myths. Maybe Leabrook wasn't just another quiet town. As these thoughts tangled within me, a sharper, undeniable sound pierced the silence, a creak, slow and ominous, from the direction of the attic above my room. Frozen, I barely breathed, every childhood fear of monsters in the attic flooding back in a visceral wave. It was probably nothing, an animal maybe. The logical part of my brain presented explanations like weak shields. But as I stood there, paralyzed between rationality and dread, another sound followed, unmistakable this time. A deliberate, dragging footstep. And I knew, without seeing, without understanding, that whatever made that sound wasn't just passing through. It was waiting. For night to deepen, for my guard to drop, for the town to whisper clearer its chilling secrets. I reached for the phone, intending to call Grandma June, if only to hear a comforting voice. But before I could dial, another whisper of motion stirred, not above, but right behind me, as if whatever resided in this house had decided to descend and make its presence undeniably known. I paused, one hand hovering over the familiar buttons of the phone, suddenly uncertain if the act of dialing would shield or expose me further. My breath hung tight in my chest, painfully taut, as the faint rustle sounded again, closer now, behind the thin curtain of darkness that swallowed up the threshold of the living room. The whisper of footsteps, so soft, so terribly deliberate, seemed to draw the very warmth from the air, replacing it with a creeping chill that slid under the worn fabric of my clothes. I stood there, the phone's cold weight a sinking anchor in my trembling hand, the number for Grandma June blurring before my eyes. From the shadowed nook behind me, where the dim light did not reach, came a faint scraping sound, like fingernails brushing against fabric. Goosebumps prickled over my skin. My rational mind scrambled for mundane explanations. A mouse, I told myself, Just a mouse lost in the wall. But deeper, in that primal part of my brain, I knew no rodent moved with such deliberate, stalking grace. The noise came again, closer. A shudder rippled through me, a visceral response to the invading proximity of something not right. With a wince, I remembered the old stories Grandma June used to whisper when summer storms knocked out the lights, about spirits lost between walls, eternally scraping, seeking something they lost long ago. But those were just stories, meant to thrill wide-eyed children, not grown adults. Yet, as the air around me thickened, those tales no longer seemed quite so fanciful. Compulsively, I jabbed at the phone's buttons, the familiar sequence both comforting and urgent, as though each ring bridging me to Grandma June could also sever the unnerving closeness of my unknown companion. "Hello," her voice, usually so warm and sure, crackled with static, distant. "Grandma, it's me," I rushed out, my words tumbling, desperate. "Honey, is everything all right?" Concern laced her tone, a thread of tension that my call had tightened. "No, the floorboards creaked ominously, a direct contradiction to my faltering denial. "I think someone's in the house." Silence crackled on the line, punctuated by rustling that now seemed oppressively near. Panic whispered to flee, to escape the tightening web of darkness and sound converging upon me. "Honey, listen to me," Grandma June's voice sliced through the fog of my fear, her words sharp, a lighthouse in the storm. "Get out of the house now. Go to the Martins next door. I'll call the police." Her tone brokered no argument, sparking a sliver of resolve in my petrified heart. I nodded, forgetting momentarily she couldn't see me, my gaze darting frantically around, seeking the safest route of escape. The front door was too far, too exposed. The kitchen, with its back door, seemed my only viable option. "I'm going now, Grandma," I whispered, as if loudness could invite disaster. "Be careful," I low. The line died with a click, severing my last thread of comfort. In the suffocating silence, the finality of my isolation pressed down, palpable as the shadows that now seemed to pulse with quiet anticipation. Hands shaking, I ended the call, the screen's light extinguishing, plunging me back into gloom. I edged toward the kitchen, each step a muted plea against the creaking wood. The familiar layout of the house morphed into a labyrinth of fear, every corner potentially veiling my unseen stalker. Suddenly, a low, sorrowful moan drifted through the stillness, not the wind, not a house settling, but something else. Something living, or once living. My heart stuttered, terror rooting me momentarily as the moan morphed into a soft, insidious laugh. "Who's there?" my voice broke, pitiful against the thickening quiet. No reply came, just the faint, mocking echo of my own fear. As I finally reached the kitchen, the back door tantalizingly close, an old photograph on the fridge caught my eye. It was me and Grandma June, smiling during some forgotten summer. Her eyes, so full of stories, of warnings, seemed to accuse me of dismissing her tales as mere bedtime fables. Guilt, sharp and hot, twined with my fear. Perhaps she had been preparing me in her own way. For this night, this moment. Steeling my resolve, I lunged for the door, fingers grappling for the knob, the cold metal a tangible relief. But as it swung open to the promise of escape, the night air cold and bracing against my face, a shadow detached itself from the others within the room. Tall, thin, impossibly close. It reached for me, not with the hands of a human, but with elongated, tapering fingers that whispered through the air like dead leaves skittering across the ground. Screaming, I tore free, stumbling into the protective embrace of the night, the door slamming shut on the unearthly sound of laughter and my own ragged breaths. Behind me, the house seemed to hum with dark satisfaction, like an evil sated for now. As I ran, barefoot and gasping, to the safety of my neighbors, the truth of Grandma June's stories clung tighter than the night's chill. This wasn't over, it was only beginning. My feet slapped against the cool, damp pavement as I sprinted, each breath a mixture of mist and desperation. The scant moonlight did little to penetrate the dense fog that had settled over the neighborhood, turning familiar streets into a labyrinthine puzzle. I could still hear the whispers, faint yet persistent, a chilling susurration that seemed to follow the rhythm of my pounding heart. Grandma June had warned me about the whispers, about the things that lurked in the shadows of our old family home, but like a fool, I dismissed her tales as the ramblings of the elderly, too steeped in superstition. The light in Mr. Henderson's porch was my beacon, a faint but steady glow in the murky darkness. The closer I got, the more the whispers intensified. No longer just a background noise, but something insistent, urgent. As I reached his walkway, tripping over a loose stone, I risked a glance back. The fog was thicker now, swirling and moving as if alive, as if it were breathing. A shiver ran down my spine, colder than the night air stripping the warmth from my bare skin. I hammered on Mr. Henderson's door, my fists clumsy and numbing from the cold. He opened almost immediately, alarm etched deep into the lines of his weathered face. "Good Lord, child, what's happened to you?" he exclaimed as he ushered me inside. Before I could answer, an overwhelming need to look back overtook me. Through the slightly ajar door, I saw it, a brief glimpse of something moving within the mist, something impossibly dark, a void in the already lightless night. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my heart thundering in terror. Mr. Henderson led me to the sitting room, his brow furrowed in concern. "Now, tell me everything," he prompted, settling into his worn armchair. I recounted the evening's horrors, the noises first thought to be branches against the window, the cold spots in halls that were previously warm, the way shadows seemed to linger longer than natural. And the photo, the old family photo, where faces seemed to age and decay before my eyes. Mr. Henderson listened in a grave silence that was almost as unsettling as the occurrences themselves. When I finished, he sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "It seems the old stories are catching up with us," he muttered more to himself than to me, a note of resigned dread in his voice. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, terrified of being overheard by whatever might still be lingering outside. "We need to withstand the night," he replied grimly, going to a dusty cabinet and withdrawing a few items. "Salt, which he handed to me, and some old, yellowed pages that looked like they'd been torn from a much-beloved book. "The salt is for protection. Make a line at the doors and windows. These," he said, indicating the papers, "are prayers, old ones from when the house was first built." His instructions were precise and possessed an urgency that made my hands tremble as I scattered the salt. We worked in tense silence, covering every potential entry point. The whispers seemed to press against the windows, hungry and insistent, but the salt held them at bay, a frail barrier against the dark. Once secured, we sat in the dim light of the sitting room, surrounded by the protective circle of salt and armed only with our fading hope. Mr. Henderson began to recite the prayers from the yellowed pages, his voice a steady drone that fought back the suffocating silence of the house. As he spoke, the shadows around us appeared to recoil, as if the words themselves wielded power. But as the night wore on, a profound fatigue set upon my limbs. My eyes, heavy and resisting, began to betray me, fluttering shut in spite of the terror that urged them to remain vigilant. In that hazy threshold between sleep and wakefulness, a vision plagued me. The house, not as it was, but overrun with darkness, its walls decayed and sagging, the air thick with the smell of rot. In the vision, I wandered the halls, calling for help that would never come, every step forward echoed by whispers that were now screams. I awoke with a start, Mr. Henderson's hand on my shoulder. "It's nearing dawn," he whispered, a trace of hope in his voice. The relief that washed over me was palpable, until a distant, almost forgotten melody played through the house, a lullaby Grandma June used to hum, its notes distorted and chilling. Our eyes met in a silent agreement of dread. The night was ending, but something told me the horror was far from over.